In this video, I would like to try to take on the ethical issues surrounding Draw Muhammad Day and the proposed Qur'an burning head on, not indirectly as I have done in the previous video. And I want to emphasize that this is going to be an analytical approach, that I'm going to try to outline premises which I think we largely agree upon, and then enumerate a couple of scenarios that suggest possible outcomes. I'm a very strong believer that our ethical decisions are more than simply the nobility of our cause. We have an obligation to reflect on, examine, and evaluate possible outcomes. It does no good if we undertake great causes and try to promote good ideas if our actions actually don't succeed in doing that. And that's where I think we have to enlist our intellects in addition to our hearts as far as deciding what courses of action we should take, especially about important questions. So I want to begin by trying to enumerate what I believe are the premises, common premises that we should all be able to agree upon with regard to the questions of Draw Muhammad Day or Qur'an burning. The first one of these is the importance of free speech in Western societies, actually importance of free speech everywhere. It is a paramount feature and virtue of our culture, and it may very well be the defining feature of our culture, and I am a very strong proponent of it. I also want to say clearly that I think that there are threats posed to free speech by Islamic extremists, certainly within their own cultures, and to a lesser degree because of a potential chilling effect that their threats, not only threats, but acts of violence actually induce elsewhere. I believe that we should act in a responsible and effective way to deter the threats to free speech from Islamic extremists. I also want to point out that these actions that are proposed are not without their attendant harms. That doesn't necessarily mean that the harms trump the actions, but that they have to be weighed in our analytical consideration of these actions. And those harms largely have to do with the insult that is leveled at the community of Muslims. I think that there's no question that people, even people of goodwill, will feel insulted by these activities. Whether they should or not is not for us to say. They will feel insulted. It's useful along these lines to partition the community of believers, of Islamic believers, at least into three parts. There are the extremist people who are given to acts of violence and rage. There are, I will call them fence sitters, and there's the people who really are not committed one way or the other. And then there's a community of people who are actually progressive and favor the advance of free speech in their culture. This is a useful partition. I'm sure it's not the only partition that one could come up with. So with these premises in mind, that free speech is important, that Islamic extremism represents a threat, that harms will result from actions of burning Qur'ans, drawing Muhammad, and that the Islamic community consists of several components that actually could be affected in different ways by these actions. I'd like to outline two scenarios. The first one, which I think is a favorable scenario in terms of the ambitions of the people who are encouraging the drawing and the burning, goes as follows, and that is that the result of Draw Muhammad Day, of burning Qur'ans, at least repeatedly, will somehow desensitize the Islamic extremists, they will at some point realize the ineffectiveness or hopelessness of their bellicosity, and as a result, their threats of violence will be reduced, and the harm that they potentially present to people who want to express their ideas freely will likewise be diminished. So that's one outcome in the first scenario. In the first scenario, there are other assumed outcomes that are favorable. One is that the fence sitters stay on the fence. In other words, that they are not incited by the insult which they feel to join the ranks of the extremists. And the other presumption in terms of the favorable scenario is that people of a liberal democratic disposition in those cultures will not be marginalized as a result of their affiliation or presumed affiliation of proponents of free speech. So the first scenario, I think, is really the intended outcome by people of goodwill who want to participate in burning Qur'ans and drawing Muhammad Day. And that is that they see it as an effective way to promote the advance of free speech, not only in Western countries by reducing threats from Islamic extremists, but by promoting the cause of free speech elsewhere. I'm going to outline what I think is scenario 2, which is, I will admit, is my bias with regard to which I think is a likely outcome. But I do think it's a reasonable part of the possible analytical things that everybody should consider. And there, the likely outcome in scenario 2 is that the extremists, far from being desensitized by the repeated depictions of Muhammad and the repeated burning of Qur'ans, become more and more enraged. And the acts of violence ebb and flow depending upon other competing causes and other pretexts that they might use in order to respond with acts of violence. The effect of fence sitters in scenario 2 is that they are pulled off the fence and radicalized more often than not in terms of their indignation and their willingness and interest in becoming more enraged and more violent with regard to their opposition to such things as Qur'an burnings and especially unflattering depictions of Muhammad that are circulated. The important third element with regard to the second scenario has to do with the effect that the insults will have on the people promoting free speech and liberal democracy in Islamic cultures, and that is that their interest in doing so may be diminished. And not only that, but that given the climate that's put in place by it, they may be politically more marginalized. So the results of the second scenario are largely a continuation of a essentially open-ended spiral of action and reaction. So that describes the two likely scenarios. There's a spectrum of likely scenarios. I think those two characterize useful points for us to consider. I'm very skeptical of the outcome of scenario 1. One of the reasons I'm very skeptical is that this idea that people are desensitized with regard to their actions because of a relentless exposure to things that discourage them is exactly the argument that the Islamic extremists would make, and their belief that if they burn and injure enough people, then maybe the proponents of Quran burning and drawing Muhammad in the West will get the idea that their efforts will be futile. So my primary objection to scenario 1 is that is that if everybody employs the same reasoning, it actually leads to scenario 2, which is an open-ended cycle of tit for tat and reaction and counter reaction. So I'm going to close by asking you to consider these scenarios, maybe outline your own. This is not about who feels more strongly with regard to the importance of free speech. It really has to do with taking an analytical approach to looking at possible ways to achieve our objectives and seriously considering whether they forward our cause or not. And I want to emphasize something that I said in a previous video, and I think that this is another example. There's a tendency to believe that the nobility of cause is all that we need to consider with regard to what steps we take in the world. There is the quote, which to some extent is useful, which is that all it takes for evil to triumph in the world is for good people to do nothing. Sadly, this is used as a license for good people to do anything in opposition to evil. I prefer my own variation on this, which I will state more strongly than I have before, and that is most of the evil in the world can triumph if good people act without thinking things through. We can actually create bad outcomes even in the pursuit of very good causes. And I will close with that by emphasizing again that I think that we share a common cause here in terms of the promotion of freedom of speech here and in the Islamic world, and that that we need to find ways that we can work together, because I believe we are all in this together, in order to encourage that eventual outcome. Thank you very much for your time. Bye-bye.